Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Craig Dickinson.
And I'm Matt Leader. Today on the show, we are taking a look at the 1984 Ghostbusters.
But before we do that, we want to make sure that we mention we were on Coffee with Kenobi. It'll be 2 weeks ago by the time this was released. It's show number 465, the top 5 things Star Wars A New Hope teaches us. Dan Zare was nice enough to have us on, and we had a great time talking about A New Hope and all these wonderful things that we were able to pull from it. Some of the things we do on the show here, and some other kind of thematic beats that we talked about. And it was a great show. We had a lot of fun. I hope you guys will check that out as well. And we also want to just say hello to all those that have now subscribed to our show. Thanks to Dan letting us plug our show a little bit. And so welcome. And there was one other thing we wanted to do, Matt. What else did we want to do before we jump into Ghostbusters?
Before we jumped into Ghostbusters, we wanted to talk about the new, better Dune movie.
Yeah, now that we made you rewatch David Lynch's Dune, I know Matt struggled through that one. That was bad on my end. But we got to watch the new one. We both got to see Denis Villeneuve's new Dune, the much better Dune.
Yeah.
Dune Part 1. And Matt, what are your kind of just some one-off thoughts about the new Dune?
So I think overall, like I have to say, it was just a much better film. It was beautifully shot. The acting was fantastic. And I really expected it to be with the caliber of actors that they had on the film. I think, we have those categories that we kind of go through when looking at a film, and every single category I think is a vast improvement over the Lynch one. Some just random thoughts that struck me that I kind of made notes of, and feel free to jump in, Craig, at any time. The first thing that struck me is it had kind of an old school sci-fi vibe to it. Like, it reminded me, the designs, especially of the ships, of something I would see on old sci-fi book covers, like the really old ones from like the 50s and 60s that look very cliched and, I don't know, just dated to me at this point. But I kind of enjoyed that because the book is from the 60s, and so it felt like it was kind of going back to that time a little bit. It struck me the amount of brutalist architecture. And for anyone who doesn't know, brutalist architecture was thought of, it kind of came about in the 50s and 60s, so right about the time Dune was written. And it focused primarily on straight lines, geometric shapes, and using lots and lots of concrete. And if you think of like modern design, like concrete, glass, metal, right? Brutalist architecture is more focused on the concrete side. And a lot of the buildings on Arrakis had a very brutalist architecture, which I found a very interesting choice. The set designs themselves, they felt very cold, very empty, very austere, cold tone-wise, because obviously Arrakis is very hot. I think that the palm trees were quite interesting. Mm-hmm. They made a point of, how it takes what's 100 people's worth of water to provide life for these 10 palm trees I think they had.
Right. Yep.
And that right there, and I believe that's also in the novel.
It seemed familiar.
Yeah.
So I think so, yeah.
But that screams of colonialism and this idea of these outsiders, and they mention this directly in the film, these outsiders coming in, taking the spice from Arrakis with no real thought towards the Fremen, right? The natives. And we paused the show for like a snack break, and my wife goes, if you replace the spice with oil and Arrakis for Iraq, this could be a story about the Middle East and people coming in trying to take oil. I'm like, yeah, probably could. And to me, that speaks of a story that's relevant to our times. And so I loved that aspect of it. The costumes I thought were fantastic. And we mentioned on the last show, the Spacing Guild people The weird, they looked like these weird slug creatures, and it was horrible. I hated them. And the Spacing Guild looked fantastic in this one. It looked weird and alien while still remaining true to the book and the lore, where they are these transformed humans that are within this kind of chamber. And so it felt like there's this wonderful blend between both kind of familiar with the military suits of House Atreides and the very, very much like Middle Eastern inspired Fremen and House Harkonnen and the Spacing Guild and the Emperor. Like everything felt distinct while also feeling familiar and just a bit weird in a good way, like alien. It felt, alien. And so I love the design of that. I do have two things, and I feel like it's nitpicking, but I'll mention them.
Let's hear them.
I feel like the movie was a little overindulgent at times, especially with some of the sweeping shots and on Caladan just resting on the scenery. And on one hand, it's beautifully shot, so it's not like it's not enjoyable in any way. But I also feel like you could have taken that time and expanded Dr. Yue's part, because he's barely in the film. And it's really important. He's a really important character. And so I feel like you're kind of, if you're limiting yourself to 2.5 hours, you're kind of cutting out some of the character work that I would love to see. And you are using these shots that are lingering on the scenery when I don't think you necessarily need to. I think if you have a Lord of the Rings situation where you have a huge extended cut, those lingering shots are fine if you add back in that character work, that I was missing from UA. Like we missed the scene when Duncan Idaho accuses Jessica of being the traitor. The dining scene from the book, and I know you can't have everything,
right?
But I feel like those were good scenes, and I kind of missed having them.
Yeah, I've said this multiple places online, but I'll say it here again. For me, the movie felt like the book.
Yeah.
And that's the highest compliment that I can give it.
Yeah.
There's definitely scenes that I was missing. I do enjoy the scene with, the dining room scene. But it was great that you still had, this is almost like Easter eggs, right? Like there's the painting of his dad. There's the bowl, right? So you can kind of piece those scenes together. If you've read the book, it's kind of a nod.
Yeah.
But if not, it's just, oh, wow, they have some interesting, things on the walls. The thing that struck me the most was the cinematography. It is such a beautiful film. And we talk about sense of scale all the time. And this movie had just massive things. Denis Villeneuve had said many times, see this in the theater if you can, because you're going to lose something other than that. And I watched it at home. My TV's not small, so it was nice. I would like to see it in the theater if I get a chance to see it. But it was interesting. I went and dug a little deeper and see who did the cinematography, and we'd mentioned him actually before when we did our Rogue One episode. Greg Fraser, who did the cinematography for Rogue One, which we have multiple times talked about how great the sense of scale is in that film, making the Death Star appear as big as it does. And here he is again doing that same thing.
Same thing. Yep.
It made sense. I'm like, yes, of course. And I like the music a lot too. I'm just a big Hans Zimmer guy anyway, and I've loved all the stuff he's done for DC and all the Christopher Nolan films. And so, but it's a different flavor in this one. I mean, there are still some heavy drums here and there, but
the heavy bass coming in.
Sure. Wow. I love that though. And some of the choral arrangements were for some trippy things that kind of bringing in that native vibe, which was some interesting choices, but cool. I like that a lot. My one quibble, and it's really a small thing because you can't have everything, was that in the Gom Jabbar scene, you don't have Paul doing the Litany of Fear. You have his mom outside doing it. And the way I reconcile those is that she's kind of projecting that he's going to be doing this. And that's fine. I would at some point like to hear him say it because
Sure.
it's just it's one of my favorite things. But I did really enjoy in that scene where at one point you see him, like the switch flips with him and you see his face change to determination and you see the Reverend Mother just kind of taken back. Mm-hmm. And like that, even as I'm talking about now, I'm getting chills. It was such a powerful moment of, oh, wow, like this is not going the way you thought it was going to go. And this guy really he's the real deal. So that I thought that was a great part in the film.
Yeah. And, it reminds me because right after that, Jessica and Paul are having a conversation. And the way it's shot, there's like 2 close-ups as they're talking. But when it pulls back, they're actually quite far away. And there's this kind of storm between them.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a little beautiful piece of cinematography that is illustrating, the character emotions and what they're going through at that moment. I wanted your opinion. I saw this on Twitter somewhere, and I'm blanking on who said it, but they brought up that the film is mirthless. There's no humor in the film, really. I think there's 2 jokes. Right. There's, am I putting on muscle? No, you're not. And smile. I am smiling. Yeah. Which are both funny. That works. What did you think? What do you think about that? The fact that there's not really any humor, or even if you agree with it?
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, it's a heavy movie. It is, but then again, like I'm a DC guy, and I like Zack Snyder, and so that doesn't bother me that much. But Jason Momoa is my favorite part of the film. He's incredibly charismatic, and like there's mirth everywhere where he's at. He's just even in the scene where Stilgar comes in and spits. Like it's true. It's a great scene. He's like, no, hold on, and it lightens it, and then he spits too, and it's like what a great moment that is too. Just like this is how precious water is. Like this is I'm giving you something. I'm giving you some of my water for that. It is a heavy film. Mm-hmm. It's not unintentionally funny like Lynch's film was. Mm-hmm. It's played straight. I don't think it has. I mean, you could get kind of ponderous with this too, where like the film could be a little bit full of itself and not recognize. Like, yeah, you're doing a space fantasy. It's kind of goofy. Like, you just buy in, like it's magic, essentially. But I didn't think that it was overbearing in any kind of mirthless way. I still think that it was fun. I think seeing, like, even that moment I mentioned earlier from the Gom Jabbar, like, that was like, whoa, that was cool. Like, that was a moment of kind of relief and also kind of flipping the tables where I didn't think it was... I don't know. I guess it depends. Like, what do they mean by mirthless? Like, do they mean that there's just no jokes, or do they mean there's no moments of levity? Because those are 2 very different things.
I kind of feel like with all the talk that's going on about Dune, and it's being talked about quite a bit online, I feel like a lot of people were talking about the film and the influences that it had on Star Wars, on fantasy, on sci-fi going forward. And so I think if you went in and you were expecting kind of a proto New Hope, you might be kind of disappointed if you went in because they are very different tonally. I think that Dune just is a more serious story. It's on face value. It's about the hero's journey. It's about Paul and betrayal and politics. It's kind of Game of Thrones politics, backstabbing meets Star Wars fantasy, right? But that isn't, they're not the same. I think that Dune is more ethereal, more philosophical in its ideas. And ultimately it's kind of a cautionary tale. And I think that, I saw that and I was like, that is kind of interesting though, because I wonder how many people went in thinking it's going to be like Star Wars. And it's not.
It's not. It's its own thing.
Yeah.
And we are officially at this point, they've greenlit the sequel, which is fantastic. Because that was another thing that I had when it was over. It's like, when's the next one coming? Which hadn't even been greenlit but it was almost immediately after. It was like during the weekend or Monday.
Yeah, it was Monday pretty quick.
When they officially greenlit that. So we got to wait 2 years, which isn't super long.
It's not bad.
But like I'd like to watch it now. Because I just love the end of the book.
I think there's going to be an amazing box set in 10 years that we'll enjoy.
There we go. So speaking of mirth, the film that we focused on this week is full of mirth. 1984's Ghostbusters. How's that for a segue?
Nah, that was fantastic. Very smooth.
There you go. I've been working on that. So let's talk about your overall thoughts for Ghostbusters from 1984, Matt. What are your opening thoughts?
So I haven't seen the original Ghostbusters in a while. Off the top of my head, maybe 10 years. Like it's been a while. And on the one hand, I think a lot of the film really holds up very well. I think the interactions with the team itself are pretty fantastic. Some of the effects look horrible, but it's a comedy. It's a fun film, and I'm willing to roll with it. Without going into too much detail, there were some aspects that I just did not like that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I was really surprised.
Oh, we got to dig into that.
Yeah, so we will come back to that. But so I want to hear your overall thoughts, and we'll loop back around.
Yeah, definitely. So first off, quick mention that Ghostbusters Afterlife is coming out in a couple weeks on November 19th. And so that's definitely one of the reasons that we're doing this episode now. I love Ghostbusters. That's another reason. And I watch that film like probably once a year. It's one of my favorite comedies. It is. I want to talk a lot about the year that it came out, 1984. It's the second highest grossing film in 1984 to Beverly Hills Cop. That was the number one film that year. Critically acclaimed, made a ton of money. I agree. It still holds up, I think, for the most part. I mean, the stop motion stuff is just atrocious, but the puppets are great.
Yeah.
I love the puppets. I love the ghost effects. I love the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I still think that works pretty well. A lot of that due to their actors' reactions. I mean, it's that we talk about this a lot. They have to sell it. And I think that they do really, really well. I love the concept of ectoplasm. I've always thought that was cool. Somebody blows their nose and you want to keep it. It's great. What a great line. There's so many good lines. We'll get to that part. There's some early product placement in this one that that's always kind of stood out to me, especially that box of Cheez-Its.
Yes,
so bright.
That actually stood out to me too.
Super bright. But I love, one thing I loved that I've noticed the last few times is that there's kind of fake product placement of the Stay Puft Marshmallows in Dana's apartment early on, which is kind of foreshadowing a little bit, which is kind of fun that they didn't go with a fake brand of that.
Yeah.
They did go with a fake brand of that. But yeah, I have to come back to the chemistry between the three leads. Like it feels like they came up together, which they did. Both Murray and Aykroyd were on Saturday Night Live, and I think they were all in Second City at one point. And you also have the SCTV, the Second City's version of Saturday Night Live, the Canadian version. Have you ever seen that, Matt?
No.
I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's on cable.
I'm not a big fan of SNL. And
I don't watch the new ones, but like the old ones, they used to have them on Nick at Night of all places. Like I think in the early 90s they did. And that's where I got caught up, and I actually got to see like Coneheads and the original, the Blues Brothers with the skit before it was a movie and those kind of things. And early Murray like singing the Star Wars theme song and that kind of stuff. Well, SCTV was essentially a Canadian version of that. It's a skit show that came out of Second City. But the people that were on there, Harold Ramis was on there, Rick Moranis was on there, John Candy was on there, Eugene Levy was on there. So it was very much the Canadian version of SNL, but tons of like high, it's still that same quality of comedic actors. And that's where Bob and Doug McKenzie, who did Strange Brew, came from. So a lot of good stuff on there. So let's talk about cinematography. We'll start getting into some of your nitpicks maybe soon. Did you have anything interesting for cinematography? Because I have a ton of stuff. But
why don't you start, and I'll jump off what you've got.
Okay. So as literature teachers, we talk about indirect characterization a lot, and we have an acronym that we use sometimes. It's STEAL, right? You can tell who a character is based on what they say, what they think, effects on others, the actions, and how they look. And I really like the opening shot of the door that says Venkman burn in hell as our intro to Peter Venkman, Bill Murray's character, because without even meeting him, we already have a preconceived idea who this guy is and who he's irritated, right? He does not have the best reputation, that he has graffiti on his door before we even meet him. I thought that was great. Another thing that I liked a lot was that you have this very clearly set up rule of thirds in the elevator as they're discussing the proton packs. And then what's funny about that is that they try and move away after they turn on Ray's back, Dan Aykroyd's back, and then they just 6 inches over to the side, try to move out of that. But they do move. There's an empty middle at that point. Some things that I didn't expect but really liked seeing this time, I had forgotten about, is because Peter Venkman, Bill Murray's character, is very cocky throughout most of the film. But he has a couple of close-ups on his face where you see that like he kind of drops the act. And it happens the first time he's confronted with Slimer, the green ghost. And it also happens when they're in the library at the beginning. And he has the opening line to the librarian ghost, and she shushes him, and the look on his face is just drops. Yeah. It's just complete. He's just like, oh, that's not good. Some other things that I thought were cool was that there's lots of triangles in this film. I always like looking for those. I think way things are set up. I noticed this at first in the banquet room on their first call, the first official call at the hotel. And at one point, you see them kind of jockeying for position. And this is weird, I don't know why it reminded me of this, but it reminded me a little bit of like the triangle offense in basketball, the Tex Winter offense, where like Bill Murray comes in and takes Dan Aykroyd's place, and then Aykroyd fills in the other gap for that. Like they're kind of just jockeying that way. But it's a triangle the whole time. And then, of course, there's a triangle as they're shooting the proton packs up into the ceiling to get Slimer. And you also see that scene kind of echoed later on where there's a super wide shot. Again, rule of thirds, where you have the terror dogs or the hellhounds, Zool on the far left, Vince Clortho on the far right. Like, it's super wide. And I know I used to see this movie on TV where they would do a pan and scan on a 4:3 TV, and you wouldn't be able to see both of those things because it's a really, really wide shot. But they're set up really nicely so that you have this triangle of the lightning that opens up the door for Gozer. So I'll let you talk for a second.
Couple things I noticed. I particularly liked the use of the camera movement. And I noticed this first right away when they're in the library, and how the camera was in kind of the scary, quote unquote, scary moments. The camera would essentially roll in front of the actors. You could see their faces the entire time. But there were quite a few moments when they were fairly long shots. It wasn't like they were trying to imitate like a one shot, right? But they would hold the camera shot very long. And it stood out to me enough because it doesn't feel like that's as common anymore, holding those shots. But I think it's more effective because it starts to build some of that tension when the characters are trying to run away from the ghosts. And you can see their faces. You can kind of see behind them as if, okay, when's it going to appear behind them? So I enjoyed that. A lot of times throughout the film, there was some good depth to the shots. And what I mean by that is they would have two characters in frame where you could see both characters when they're talking to the mayor at the end. There are a couple times when you can see all the actors and stuff, and you can kind of see them all reacting to the conversation going on. And I really enjoy when films do that and not just simply close-ups of the people, whoever's talking, right? Because then you miss everything that's going on, especially in comedy. There are several moments when they're up on top of the building and they get blown away by Sigourney Weaver. And right after she asks him if he's a god, right? And she blows him away. And I think it's Ernie Hudson, his character. Yeah. He says, if anybody asks if you're a god, you always say yes. Right. But you can see all their faces and them all like looking at it. And so it's like those kinds of shots I really appreciate because you can see everything that's going on. You can see the comedic reactions of the characters. Even just little things like when the librarian is walking by the library card drawers and all the cards start popping out. Yeah. It's just shots like that where you can see it all and it allows some breathing space. In some ways, it kind of reminded me almost a little bit of Star Wars, the cinematography, in the sense of it felt more documentary style, where it wasn't trying to do anything too fancy. It wasn't trying too hard. You know, we just talked about the new Dune, where it's like, okay, they set this shot up to make it look beautiful, and it worked. But it feels very like you meant to do that. This feels more like it's not like a mockumentary style, right? But it feels almost more like peeking behind the curtain at these guys' jobs. You know, it feels like a little more, I don't want to say mockumentary. It's not documentary style, but it's, you know, it's less concerned with creating those beautiful shots and more about being clear about the comedy and the facial expressions and things that are going on.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So you look at, and I agree with you that kind of looks like that. The scene, I was also thinking of the scene where Walter Peck brings the police officer down and the guy from Con Ed down at the same time. You can kind of see everybody in the scene at the same time instead of kind of doing shot counter shot over and over again.
And then you can see the hesitancy of the guy to like shut it off.
Exactly. Well, you have Laszlo Kovacs doing cinematography, who's a veteran cinematographer. You know, been doing movies since the 60s. Did Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, and you know all the way up through. I did Multiplicity also for Harold Ramis. Wide ranging, you know, list of work that he's done. And then you also have, you know, a couple of guys editing. One of which Sheldon Kahn did one of Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's from '75. So you got guys. David Blewett also did editing. You have guys who've been in the business for a while. They're not, you know, what's the newest, latest trend? Like they're going to do it the way they've been doing it, and they've got enough experience to know. Like sometimes, like just leave the camera where it's at, right? Don't over edit. We talked about this with Stuart Baird as well. Just kind of let it go. One thing I do want to touch on. You said Sigourney Weaver hits him. You meant Gozer though.
Well, yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because she's his girlfriend who became a dog.
Right.
Anything else with cinematography? I had a couple other things. I like the difference in color where you had just kind of the nondescript gray uniforms. It's very utilitarian, right? And they kind of talk about the fact that they're just exterminators. Like that's kind of the way it's presented. Versus you have like the neon ghosts and the lightning and stuff like that. It just really pops because you have this kind of nondescript versus this very outlandish bright neon colors. I thought that was great. And I mentioned the Stay Puft Marshmallow before, that's fully camera work, right? I mean, it's a dude in a suit shot from a really low angle and then superimposed over the city. And it's like, it works. I think it works really well.
Yeah. I will kind of jump ahead a little bit and talk about the prop design and the props and stuff, because you mentioned the suits, and I do think that's a nice contrast. I think that probably one of my favorite aspects in this film was the prop design. I think it's just very fun. The proton packs are weird enough. And like they have the moment where the sound design too, right, is for the proton packs is fantastic. Yeah. But you have that moment when they're in the elevator for the first time in the hotel and they turn it on and you hear the whir of it, you know, coming up. Yep. And, you know, these are like unregistered nuclear devices on our backs. And then the other two kind of scoot over, and it's, but just the design of like the traps, right?
Yep.
And how like when they first catch the green ghost, right, and it's coming down from the hotel and it closes on the trap, and then you see the little blinking light, and it's just like there's just a moment of tension of like, is it going to work? And it's like it does, but that's all visual. I love when he's explaining. I believe it's Egon who's explaining to Winston when like the first day he's hired, like, right, here's how the trap works. Like you put it in. Yeah. And I just remember thinking when I saw that, it's like, that looks real. Like, I don't know what a ghost trap would look like, but it would look like that.
Right.
And it's just like practical on a level of it. It looks authentic to the world, but it's also funny because he's like, this button, this button, this button, and you're done. Like you're setting a microwave or something.
Yep.
And so it's that kind of blend of fantastic with the mundane that I think makes this film as special as it is.
Yeah, I agree. It's played. I mean, that's one thing I talked about a lot in performance is that we'll talk about that a little bit. Performance that is played straight for the most part. Like nobody's really mugging for the camera or like wink nod to the audience other than, you know, maybe Rick Moranis. He's a little bit over the top. He might be the only one that's a little bit melodramatic, but he's a nerd, super nerd, and he's possessed later on as, you know, he's a dog. But everybody's, it's pretty much, they trust the script enough to just kind of go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the jokes just come naturally from just the absurdity and kind of the deadpan deliveries.
Well, and that's what I love about the humor is it's very much like a situational comedy. It's a workplace comedy. And it's like you've got a bunch of guys and they've got different personalities and stuff, and then they're trying to be a team. They're trying to do extraordinary things.
Right.
But it's also just a job at the end of the day. And I think that's what allows, I think, a little bit of connection where it's like, okay, I get they look tired. I think they even like that's one of the lines in there. It's like, you look tired. Like, do I?
You didn't look like, you didn't used to look like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right before that. Yeah. It's pretty great.
And so it's like, yeah, I think we've all felt that way one day or another at work. And so it's like that wonderful blend of just the weird and the spooky and the fantastic with it's Monday.
Yeah. Exactly. There's a call sheet.
Yeah.
What did you think about the music? It gets a lot of attention is drawn to the theme song,
which is fantastic.
Ray Parker Jr.'s.
Yeah,
it's a great song. Played multiple times. I believe played 3 times. Played over the at the beginning. You have that cold open, which I also love that there's a cold open with that, and then the logo dissolves and you get to hear the theme song, and then you have a very 80s montage, which is fantastic. There's montages a lot in
There's
some films we're going to do, which is great. A nice way to kind of catch us up from what they did one case to now they're veterans. And then you have Casey Kasem doing the announcing on there, which is fun too, because that's very much, hey, it's an 80s thing. That's, it's America's Top 40 dropped in there. But I think what also doesn't get enough attention is the actual score.
Yeah.
By Elmer Bernstein is I think is fantastic, because the Ghostbusters have a leitmotif. And it's not, the Ghostbusters song. It's just kind of just little jaunty piano. It's heard a ton of times. I mean, I didn't take an actual count, but I would gather it's a dozen to 20 different times where you hear that. And you also have this kind of lovely orchestral theme for Dana, where you hear it at the end. It's kind of the main way you hear it, but you also hear it when Peter asks her out, or like they're out. I think that's Rockefeller Center.
Yeah,
where they're out there. Hear it a couple of times. And you have this, and you also have lots of other pop music in the music. There's in the movie. There's a lot
more than I remember.
Yeah, mix and match.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this really interesting balance. But I think, and as a kid, I always remembered, the Cleaning Up the Town song and Magic, where their ghosts are released, and Saving the Day at the end. I always loved that song. But Elmer Bernstein's score does the heavy lifting, and it fits so well that you don't. Pay that much attention to it. I mean, I guess it kind of does its job by being in the background. It's like an offensive lineman, right? It doesn't screw up, and so you don't pay attention to it.
That's a great way to describe score.
Right?
I love that.
It's got the creepy bendy music. I had to look this up. What that is? It's an owned Martineau. It's a French instrument, which is great, and it has that it feels creepy. It's a great score. I really like it. I just want to give some shout outs to Elmer Bernstein, who's been around and did a lot of great scores. He's been around forever too. He did the 10 Commandments, for crying out loud, right? He did the 10 Commandments, did Magnificent Seven, To Kill a Mockingbird. He did those prestigious movies, and then he did Animal House and Airplane and Trading Places and Meatballs and Stripes for Ivan Reitman. And so he's a natural selection, to do Ghostbusters, even after he's done all these massive, very serious, biblical epics, for crying out loud. But he did a great job on this film.
I think it was very interesting because it felt like the score kind of seesawed back and forth between trying to be creepy and scary, and like the I don't know what instrument it was you looked up.
The owned Martineau,
right? But it's got that kind of a classic horror movie vibe. And then at times, what pops into my head was like Scooby-Doo, where it's like goofy. Yep. And it works because that's the kind of movie it is, where it's got a blend of, it's also, goofy, but scary.
Yeah.
And it's trying to be both. And it strikes a pretty good balance, I think, between those two.
Yeah, and it's a movie where the big bad ultimately is a giant marshmallow man.
Which is fantastic. It's my favorite part of the movie.
And it works.
Yeah.
It totally does. But it also has like some legitimately creepy things. Like you think of like that cab driver. Like that could be scary for little kids. I remember when I first saw the trailer, I mean, this is 84, so I would have been probably 8 when I first saw this trailer, and like it scared me legitimately. I saw it on TV. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this looks scary!" And my parents were like, "No, it's like this is the guys that are in it. This is going to be a funny movie."
Yeah,
and I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it later on VHS. That's videotape, kids, and liked it. But it strikes a balance. It can be legitimately scary, and Zool and Vince are pretty scary as in their dog forms too, but. Ultimately, yeah, it hits the sweet spot.
Well, I also think the effects for like the dogs make them look more scary than they might be if they were CGI. I don't know but because I don't know, they look terrifying enough, but I don't know, it's something about the way the stop motion or whatever they use also kind of for me sells it a little bit.
Sure, it's unnatural.
Yeah.
And I know I've seen a little bit of that they're going to be in small spoiler, in Afterlife too. So that'll be obviously updated. I don't think they're going to do stop motion, but
no, probably
not. I don't. It'll be interesting to see if it works as well or better. I don't know, because you bring up a good point. There is something, and as a kid that didn't bother me at all, but even still, it looks
uncanny.
Surreal.
Yeah.
That's a good word for it too. So we talked a little bit about the performances and how the humor is coming from the writing. I just wanted to say also just how much Sigourney Weaver is amazing in this film. The things I noticed, I mean, I'd always known that she was great doing, playing 2 parts essentially, right? And she gets to play Zool and sells that beautifully. But she also just is very understated disgust with Venkman when she shows up in her apartment, and she's just not having any of it.
Yep.
And it's beautiful. It's because she could totally just be like, "You're a jerk, get out." But it's restrained, right? She's just annoyed. And it's like, maybe if I just stop talking, he'll leave eventually.
And the same with Rick Moranis' character as well.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So she's trained herself to kind of deal with annoying characters.
Yes. And this is where I'm going to rant a little bit about what I didn't like, which was Venkman.
Okay.
Almost exclusively.
Oh my goodness.
So he's
sacrilege.
Keeping things PG. He's just a jerk.
Yeah.
And you brought up a great point where it's like, I think the filmmakers know that, right? Because you have that scrawl on the graffiti, right, at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
And we didn't talk about this, but the scene where he is doing the ESP, right, with the and he's,
I had that earlier because they show you the card, but they don't show you the card.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like they're very clearly establishing what kind of person he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so slimy. I don't. And I know I get that that's kind of what they're going for, right? But it really looks like he's hitting on one of his students at the beginning of the film.
Oh, he's not. Doesn't look like it. He is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But you know what I mean.
I do.
That's it. It kind of disgusts me. It's like, I don't like that, right?
Yeah.
The coming on to Dana Barrett, Sigourney Weaver, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like this woman is legitimately freaked out. She's looking for help. And he comes in and he's just dropping things. She's like, "Oh, that's the bedroom," but nothing happens in there. And he's like, "That's a shame." Or, whatever he says.
What a crime. Yeah.
And he's like, "I'm just going to go for it." And she's like, "Oh, God." And I just felt so bad. And it's well acted and stuff. And I don't like it. And I think I nailed down why.
Okay.
So there was a video essay by a YouTuber, Lindsay Ellis, and she was examining the Guardians of the Galaxy film, right? And Peter Quill, I think, is similar to Bill Murray's character, Peter Venkman, in terms of attitude, right? And she brought up this great point that in kind of a traditional film, Hollywood film, the main character gets the girl at the end. That's part of the quote unquote prize, right? Is he gets the girl. But she brought up the point, like, does he really deserve the girl? Because if you think about Venkman and his attitudes and his actions, is he really being a good, like, partner for Sigourney Weaver? I don't think he is. And especially at the beginning. He's creepy, he's slimy, and he gets rewarded by the end. And it's like, but what did he do? Like, he didn't grow at all. He didn't become a better person. There's just kind of a montage of Sigourney laughing at his antics. And that's it.
Right.
Now, in Guardians of the Galaxy, by contrast, by the end of the first film, Peter Quill and Gamora do not end up together. Now, there's some pretty clear, like, relationship between the two, right? And we could probably easily guess that they will be together at some point. They do care about each other, but they are not together. He doesn't get rewarded for his behavior. And it's not really until Peter begins to grow as a good person that Gamora becomes more attached to him, really, in the second film and beyond, second Guardians film and beyond. And I was like, that's a good point. This is kind of a perfect example of, like, Venkman's not a good guy. He just isn't. And I think you can make the argument that, like, being a good guy wouldn't be funny. Like,
yeah,
part of the humor of Venkman being a jerk, like, to the EPA guy, right? Sure.
Great.
That's funny. Yeah. Yes. I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way. I did not like it. And I think the other thing is that is largely left behind halfway through the film or so. Like, that kind of slimy behavior just kind of drops out a little bit, it seemed like to me.
Okay. A couple things on that. I am assuming you've seen Ghostbusters 2.
I have, and I don't remember anything about it.
Okay. Yeah, I watched the second one just the other week, just this last week as well. And what's interesting, you bring that up, and I think that that's a valid point. I think that the writers, which would be Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, recognize that, because when we get to Ghostbusters 2, it's 5 years later, and Dana has been married and now is just getting a divorce from somebody other than Peter. She's had a baby with somebody else. Like, Peter and her did not work out because of the fact that he was a child, essentially. That's kind of the way that she describes him. And so, it's in the moment, you can kind of see, like, in a stressful situation, like, it's convenient and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you can look at that as, and I'm not saying that's excused or whatever else, but
right.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that those discussions probably did take place. Yeah. Like, should we just have them be together, have them be married, whatever it's going to be when we start the second movie? But we don't.
Right.
We say, you know what? This was not built on anything substantial. He's not a mature enough adult to have a relationship with her. He doesn't deserve her. He hasn't done anything to deserve her yet. And so let's not have that happen. And so I think that you do see in Ghostbusters 2, to just have a small side, that he does grow through that. He makes some more mature choices through it. He's much less snarky in that film, at least around her.
Yeah. When I think
he makes a couple of jokes about I have all new moves and stuff like that. But
sure. But it's like, but
he's still good. Peter. But
that's good character growth.
Yeah.
And that's what I would want to see. And I just thought it was a really interesting point, because that does happen.
Yeah. Sure.
Where, the main character gets rewarded because he's the main character, not because he's a good guy.
Yeah.
And this movie kind of has that. What I like, though, because like I said, I've seen Ghostbusters 2, but I remember nothing about it. Yeah. That's fantastic.
I like it a lot. Yeah. I highly enjoy it. I think you should watch it again.
And as a series, that makes me happy.
Good.
Because that tells me that Aykroyd and Ramis are looking at it as screenwriters and looking at those characters and being like, does this make sense? Or is this just happening because that's what's supposed to happen?
Right.
And it doesn't sound like, they carried that into the second one.
Yeah.
But I'll put it this way. This is kind of workplace comedy. I would not want to work with Venkman.
No.
I'll watch a movie about him, but I wouldn't want to work with him.
Yeah. And he's really just kind of, that's a character Bill Murray's played a lot.
Yeah.
right? That's kind of what you're looking for. Bill Murray's in the movie, at least, prior to, I mean, he did a serious film right after this. But when he was doing those films in the 80s, from Meatballs on up, it was like, that's Bill Murray. That's who he is. That's what you're going to get in this. So was there another thing that you had another quibble with, or was that your main?
That was just it. Yeah. I didn't like Venkman.
Yeah. So watch Ghostbusters 2. Okay. There are so many great lines in this movie. We talk about dialogue. Like, I wrote down, I think, all of them, the entire movie. Do you have, I'll limit myself to just one. Do you have a favorite line or exchange, just so we can include this, but not spend, because literally I can make the whole episode could be about the dialogue in this film, because I think it's so funny.
You go first.
Okay. I'm going to go with one that didn't used to make me laugh, but it makes me laugh more now. And it is when they are checking out the fire station. Mm-hmm. And Venkman says, "What do you think, Egon?" And Egon has this rant where he says, "I think this building should be condemned. There's serious mental fatigue in all the load-bearing members. The wiring is substandard. It's completely inadequate for our power needs. And the neighborhood is like a demilitarized zone." And Ray comes in. "Hey, does this pole still work? Wow, this place is great. When can we move in?" And like, that's it.
Yeah.
It's over. He doesn't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has a fire pole. The building should be condemned. It's horrible. But it has a pole. We're doing it. But it's his money, right?
Yeah.
Because it's his house.
Right. They're mortgaging 3 times. It's so true. There are a ton of great lines. I'm actually going to go with one that isn't comedic. And it's more like a passage. But it's when Winston and Ray are in the car towards the end.
Yes.
And they are setting up, they're building up the tension for the end of the film. And Winston says, "Hey, Ray, do you believe in God?" Ray says, "Never met him," which by itself is a good line. Yep. But then later on in the conversation, Winston again says, "Hey, Ray, do you remember something in the Bible about the last days when the dead would rise from the grave?" Ray says, "I remember Revelation 6:12, and I looked, and he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there were a great earthquake, and the sun became as black as sackcloth, and the moon became as blood." Winston says, "And the seas boiled, and the skies fell. Judgment Day. Judgment Day."
Yeah.
Every ancient religion has its own myth about the end of the world. Myth. Ray, has it ever occurred to you that maybe the reason we've been so busy lately is because the dead have been rising from the grave? It's like, I don't know. To me, that's a great little conversation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's building character, right? It's kind of fleshing out the character of these two. I love that line. "Do you believe in God?" Never met him.
Never met him.
Great character line.
Yep.
But it's also building the tension for the plot, like the actual story of things are getting bad. And, these guys who are the Ghostbusters, they're getting nervous. Like they're not sure about this. Okay, I got one more rant. I just remembered because thinking about the end of the film. So EPA guy.
Yep.
He's not
Ultra
wrong.
Pack. Which part?
I was watching this, and now the actual person is a jerk. He's a bully. He's not going about it the right way, right?
No.
But he's also not wrong about, like, there should be some kind of check on the hazardous materials that these guys are using, right? Because it could be really dangerous. And I was thinking, like, yeah, that makes sense. If I were living next to the Ghostbusters, I would want someone checking in on them. I don't know.
But who's more of an expert than Egon? This is the tricky thing. Yeah.
I agree. But then it's like, I think if they had come in and Egon, work with me here, show me what's going on. Is it, show me the plane.
But then we wouldn't get the big explosion.
I know. I know.
Gozer.
And this is a stupid nitpick, right? Because that would ruin.
So the movie can happen, Matt.
But you know what I mean?
I do know what you're saying.
Where it's like,
No, and there have been essays written about this too. Yeah. And like, this is a movie right in the middle of the 80s, and it's it's deregulation and it's jobs starting, people starting their own business and all those things. That like, it's very much a pro small business, like just getting it off the ground type of thing.
Yeah.
And anti-regulation.
But most small businesses, like coffee shops, aren't having like unregulated nuclear devices strapped to their back. So
that's true. But most of them aren't run by Egon.
Yeah.
So I will say there's a lot of lines that we left off.
Yes,
so if you're listening and there's a line that is your favorite line that we did not take, please email us, send us a GIF of that on Twitter, send us a speak by, let us know what your favorite line is, because I'm sure we didn't cover it because there's so many and we could talk about this for an hour. Just on the lines. Like, listen, you smell something? I don't get that one. That's another one by Ray. So good. We talked a lot about body language, facial expressions. Peter's face was my favorite thing. Just watching his face just fall, crestfallen when he's out of his element, which is, again, one of the few times that you see him kind of break that persona of, like, I'm just an all-know-it-all jerk and I don't care about any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. He's authentically scared. I talked about the costumes a little bit already. I like that big hair. The big 80s hair was fun.
Yeah.
Egon's hair especially is like, I don't know, 8 inches off the top of his head. Yeah, it looks like an 80s movie, but not over the top. There's not like crazy neon everywhere or anything like that.
I think it all pretty fits pretty well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when we talk about world building a little bit later, like, really the biggest thing I just had was that it feels, for the most part, and you talked about this with the props too, it's like, this feels pretty realistic. Mm-hmm. It's not over the top. It's not obnoxiously stylized or anything. It just kind of feels, it feels real.
Yeah, it feels authentic to the world.
Yeah, and, to, again, segue, setting and design, locations, most of the exteriors, the vast majority of them are really New York. Mm-hmm. Ivan Reitman was on record as saying, like, this was going to be his New York movie. And it is. It shows, so, like, by putting it in these actual, we talked about Rockefeller Center and, 55 Central Park West is actually the building you could go to. That's where Gozer shows up. I love that some of this, they did guerrilla style. So they were filming it and like had to leave because they didn't, so they didn't get busted. They didn't, they were not allowed to be filming there, but they did it anyway. So that's another part, like just being on location, which is another 80s thing that just, you can't replicate that. It just feels real because it is.
Well, it was, to break up what we're talking about, it's the same with the new Dune. They filmed a lot on location.
Right.
And you can't fake that. Not really.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the Firehouse is another piece, mm-hmm. With set decoration, that feels like a workplace.
Yeah.
All the wood on the walls and they have the lockers. Yeah, it's a weird one, sure. But, filing cabinets, like nothing's hidden.
Yeah.
Like it's all out there. It looks like a place you could walk into and ask for help or ask for a job like Winston Zeddemore does. One thing that I found this time doing research was the scene in Dana's apartment where Zool grabs her. That's a rubber door. And that's a great practical effect. They wouldn't do that practically now. They'd probably do that CGI, mm-hmm. but you have this flexible door where people's hands are being pushed against, which is a creepy effect. Love that. That whole scene is creepy as all get. Then and then it's, crew members' hands punching through the
fabric of the chair. Yeah.
All done in shot,
mm-hmm.
right? On camera. So just another great way to do it. And that's what I think why the movie holds up so well, because we have a lot of those things. Also, the eggs frying on the kitchen counter, not CGI. Those are eggs that they superheated that kitchen counter and they start frying them right there. Mm-hmm. What a great effect.
Yeah.
What a great idea.
A lot of the practical effects, even the library cards being shot out from the very beginning.
Beautiful. Yep.
It was
blowing those things out with the air hose.
Yep. It looks fantastic, the effects.
Okay. Anything else with setting and design before we move on?
I don't think so.
So with characters, I did a little bit of background research on these two. As we know, we talked about the leads a lot, but what I thought was interesting was that there is a lot of on record who might have been playing those roles. So I thought this would be kind of interesting. So we know Bill Murray plays Peter Venkman, and Bill Murray has throughout his career been kind of non-committal except for the last minute. Like when he signed up for this film, he kind of like, sure, I'll do it, but didn't really sign on the dotted line. So they didn't really know for sure that it was going to be him. Originally, it was going to be John Belushi, and then he died. This movie is going to be totally different. It was going to be like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd going through space and traveling through time and a whole bunch of weird stuff before Ivan Reitman was like, this is never going to work because it's going to be way too expensive. We'll never make it happen. And that's where Harold Ramis comes in, and they kind of like, okay, we're going to need to ground this and turn this essentially into like you've mentioned, the workplace comedy. So here's some actors that could have played Peter Venkman. And I think a lot of them would have worked, but some of them maybe not so well. So Michael Keaton, Chevy Chase, Tom Hanks, Robin Williams, Steve Guttenberg, and Richard Pryor. And I could see I could see Michael Keaton doing that pretty well.
Yeah.
Chevy Chase too.
Yeah.
And that's again that SNL connection. So
right. I feel like Robin Williams would be an interesting choice.
Yeah.
I don't see him as the jerk that Venkman is.
He doesn't typically play that.
No.
I mean, he has a couple of times, but
yeah,
he's not as hard edge as Bill Murray is. Dan Aykroyd was always going to be Ray because, he's the writer.
Mm-hmm.
But for Dana Barrett, we had Daryl Hannah, maybe. Denise Crosby, who was in Star Trek The Next Generation. That's probably the thing she's most famous for. Tasha Yar. Julie Roberts, who would have been really young for that part at the time, in 1984. Kind of interesting. Sigourney Weaver was great.
Mm-hmm.
And I know she had to kind of convince them that she could do comedy, which, again, she's not really funny in this, which is interesting, right? We consider this a comedy, but it doesn't.
She's more of the straight man in the comedy. But I think that's an important element of comedy is 100%. Someone to play off of. So.
Yep. Like we mentioned earlier, her reactions to Bill Murray just being obnoxious. Mm-hmm. Like she's letting us know that it's not okay the way he's being that way. Harold Ramis, co-writer, but also wasn't necessarily going to be in the movie, right? He's also directed. He directed a couple things. What did he direct before this? He directed... 1 second here. Let me check my notes. Let's see. He also directed Caddyshack, for crying out loud. Did Groundhog Day later with Bill Murray too. So he directed a bunch of stuff. But had written many things like Meatballs and Back to School and some other things. And for his part, Christopher Walken was one of the ones that might have played him. Which I love Christopher Walken always, but that would have been, I don't know, might have been a little very different. John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, I can kind of see that. Yeah. Jeff Goldblum in anything, I'm good with that. And then Michael Keaton was up for that one as well. The only one I think from this that I actually knew was that John Candy was originally offered the part of Louis Tully. But he was doing it so strangely that ultimately it didn't work out.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
And there's actually, it kind of goes back and forth about whether or not Eddie Murphy was originally going to play Winston Zeddemore. Aykroyd says yes, and they had been in Trading Places together. Of course, Reitman says no. So it's kind of a weird thing. Ultimately, Eddie Murphy's in Beverly Hills Cop this same year, and so that doesn't, wouldn't have worked out schedule-wise. I think that's probably the biggest reason he's not in the film. And that worked out pretty well for him. I mean, that's obviously that's going from a very small role. Ernie Hudson's role is not very big in this film, too. The lead role in Beverly Hills Cop was massive, so, good on him. And at one point, Paul Rubens was envisioned, Pee Wee Herman himself, envisioned as Gozer the Gozerian, which I've also heard was going to be kind of a representation of Igor Shandor. Is that how you say the name? I think that's the guy who was trying to bring Gozer and design the building, was going to be Paul Rubens. So instead, we got the... This chick is toast lady. So that's what I found for characters, just to kind of add a little bit of historical context. So Matt, I guess we're down to final thoughts. What are your final thoughts on Ghostbusters?
I think final thoughts. I think it really holds up as workplace comedy. It's something that has kind of struck me, and I know other people have written about this too, the lack of comedies in recent movie years. And I feel like this kind of comedy is something that could potentially bring some comedy films back, because it's not a out and out just comedy. It's kind of an action comedy movie where you've got the adventure and the characters, but it's also got that workplace element. And I would love to see more films that are made in that vein. And, who knows? Maybe they wouldn't turn out, as good as Ghostbusters. But I just feel like it's kind of a genre. It kind of, for me, it defined a genre of kind of the action comedy workplace, that triangle of genre squished together. And I think it does it really well. I think the film largely holds up in the places that it doesn't. Seems like some of my character issues seem to have been addressed in Ghostbusters 2. Some of the effects I'm more than willing to forgive, as the movie is very fun to watch. So overall, I enjoyed coming back to it.
Nice. Yeah, it is. It's kind of the granddaddy of, Men in Black. Or that's probably the best, type of movie in the same.
Yeah, in that same.
Best one in this type. I mean, there's several. R.I.P.D. is one that I think of. There's several. Like, oh, wow, this is supposed to be like Ghostbusters. Evolution was another one. Yeah. David Duchovny. That's an Ivan Reitman film, too. Just doesn't capture that same thing. No. It's a very hard, formula to crack. And they've been trying. So hopefully, maybe we'll get some resurgence with the
Afterlife.
Film. Yeah, we'll hope so. I wanted to point out the Ghostbusters was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. Didn't win either one, but it was nominated for Best Original Song for Ghostbusters. Lost to Stevie Wonder, I Just Called to Say I Love You. So you can go back and forth on which one that should, holds up better. And then Best Visual Effects, which is interesting because we talked about the effects on that. It lost to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, come on. It's Indiana Jones. This is my favorite thing from this, though, is that I mentioned it earlier. It's the second highest grossing film in 1984. And I'm going to go through, I want to let you know about some of the movies that came out this year, because I remember, I kind of had a sense from growing up in the 80s that there's just less movies out now. Because it used to be, you'd go to the movies and there'd be 10 movies that you want to see. And I thought maybe that's just an exaggeration, like when you go into the toy store. No, there was an entire 75-foot long wall of Star Wars figures. It wasn't that, but it felt like that. But just to give you an idea, first off, in 1984, this film was released on the same day as Gremlins, same day, and Top Secret, which is a Abrams Zucker movie, like Airplane. If you haven't seen it, it's hilarious. But here are some other films that came out in 1984. Again, it's the second highest grossing after Beverly Hills Cop. So you have Footloose, This is Spinal Tap, Splash, Romancing the Stone, 16 Candles, The Natural, mentioned Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, only 2 weeks before. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, 1 week before. 2 weeks after it comes out, The Karate Kid, Cannonball Run 2, Conan the Destroyer, The Last Starfighter, The Muppets Take Manhattan, The Never-Ending Story, Revenge of the Nerds, Purple Rain, Red Dawn, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, which is hilarious and makes sense it didn't make any money because crowded. Dreamscape, which is like Inception in the 80s. The Terminator, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one. Supergirl, Beverly Hills Cop, as I mentioned. Dune, our last episode. Makes sense. I didn't make any money, too. Starman, and both Breakin' and Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. That's in 1 year. And I didn't even list them all. I just pulled out, the ones that I recognized and knew that, this is, a classic film from the 80s. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I do wonder why. I mean, I wonder if it was that crop of filmmakers. I wonder, because that's, we talk about the blockbuster kind of being born with Star Wars, which is only a couple years really before. And, movies take years to produce and make and stuff. I wonder if by that point, they were trying to make those blockbuster hits and push them out. And I also wonder, putting aside COVID and all that, because that's thrown movies way off. Right. I felt like there was at least one movie I wanted to watch every month, which felt pretty good. And, I do look at this list and I recognize most of them. I don't know why. Yeah.
And it's not just summer, too. I mean, that's kind of, we got into a rut there for a while where it was like everything had to come out in the summer. And that's kind of changed a little bit. I remember that was a big deal, like Batman v Superman came out in March. And that was and there's some other films that came out in February. It's it's horror movies that typically would come out earlier.
Right.
But Beverly Hills Cop came out in December. These are throughout, Footloose was in February. So there was through every month, there was 4 films, 5 films that were big moneymakers, or at least movies that have like a track record of being, that's a quintessential 80s movie. This 1984 just being not to mention the movie 1984 came out in 1984. Just what a great year for film, is just kind of being that quintessential, year in that decade.
Yeah. So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. It really helps us get the word out about the show, and we'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts, especially about this film and anyone else that we're doing. Any other films, and discuss all things related to those movies.
One last thing. Our next episode will be a review of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Feel free to send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from those 3 films, and we'll share them on the next episode.